Hey guys, welcome back. So today I want to talk to you guys all about neighbor romances, which takes the term love thy neighbor to a whole new level, if you know what I mean. But when it comes to romances, if you are familiar with the genre, you'll know that there is what is called a forced proximity trope, which is basically a trope where the main characters or the couple are forced to be within a very small space to one another. Now that could be anything from like they're on a road trip, or they end up being snowed in somewhere and have to share a bed, or they are roommates. And in the case of this video, they could be neighbors. Now, I particularly wanted to talk about neighbors just because when it comes to the subgenre or the trope, I think that Neighbors, for me at least, is a really fun play because you can get all kind of antics, and I find that it usually lends itself to a little bit more diversity. Now that could be simply because of the books that I've read when it comes to forced proximity, but I find Neighbors a little bit more realistic, and that's not to say that I need all my romances to be realistic, but being snowed in and having to share a bed usually is a little bit of a fantasy, you know what I mean? Whereas you could totally have a hot neighbor, and that's not too far-fetched. So I figured I would share with you guys some of my favorite neighbor romances. As usual, let me know if you've read any of these, but if you have your own personal suggestions, please leave them in the comments, because as usual, you guys know that I am always looking to add to my TBR, and when it comes to neighbor romances, I can't get enough of them. As for the books that I'm about to share with you guys, I tried to pick a semi variety. I say semi because obviously they're all romances, but we've got some romantic comedies. I've got a couple of audio books. I've got one that is even a romantic suspense. So we're kind of having a little bit of everything when it comes to like what's within the romance genre. So depending on what kind of romances that you prefer to read, hopefully you'll at least find one of these books helpful, or ones that you want to add to your TBR. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Okay, so first book up, which I swear I did not do this on purpose when I was writing out my list, but the first book is actually a hockey romance. And if you've been around my channel for a while, you know that I want to say maybe like a month or so ago, I actually did a video spotlighting hockey romances. I absolutely love them, and it's just pure coincidence that we're leading the list with a hockey romance, but it's called A Favor for a Favor. I absolutely adored this neighbor romance because it was sweet, sexy, and funny to boot. So basically what we have is a hockey player realizes that his neighbor across the hall from them, who is his teammate, has somebody coming into his house in the middle of the night, ends up waking the guy up just because of all of the fumbling and everything. The guy looks out of his peephole, and it seems to be this random woman. And this automatically makes him jump to conclusions because he knows that his neighbor is actually married, and so he thinks it's just some puck bunny, creeping in for a late night booty call. The two of them exchange words. Obviously, there is some tension because she assumes that he's a jerk, and rightfully so, because he assumes that she's some side piece and he doesn't treat her so nice. But regardless, we find out that it is not a puck bunny, booty call, middle of the night, what have you. It's actually his neighbor's sister. And so the two of them end up obviously having a relationship. But I think this one is super fun, not only because, again, I love hockey romances, but the chemistry between the two of them with their banter. I think Helena Hunting, the author, does a really good job with having the banter between the two of them, not only because of how they first meet with the jabs to one another, but even throughout the story, the two of them are still kind of like taking shots at each other whenever possible. And the way that they end up getting together, I don't want to give too much away, but she helps him out with a problem, he helps her out with a problem, and so even though they have this agreement that is supposed to stay strictly professional, it never does. But yeah, this is my first example of a neighbor romance, and I really enjoyed it. And if you're a fan of hockey romances, then maybe you will too. Yes. Okay, next up on this list we have Wallbanger, and I absolutely adored this book. It's actually part of a series, but strangely enough, this is one of those rare romance series where the rest of the books in the series continue to focus on the main character rather than, say, like a friend or or a brother or whatever kind of spin-off of another couple. This one focuses on the same two characters, but Wallbanger is the first book in the series, and basically it is about a set of neighbors where the woman keeps hearing literal banging noises on her wall of her next door neighbor when he's hooking up with other women, and it drives her crazy. I mean, rightfully so, but she confronts him about it, and he is this arrogant guy who thinks that she is mostly kind of nagging on him because she needs to get laid. And while that is partly the truth, she's also just annoyed because she wants to get a good night's sleep. And so the two of them end up naturally hooking up. But I like this book really for the same reason that I like A Favor for a Favor, and that is to say the banter between the two of them. I will say their chemistry is extremely hot and I really enjoyed it. But the writing in this book, not only in this book, but the series in general, is really well done. And that's really saying a lot, because when it comes to romances where the couple's story continues into another book, I'm usually not a fan of that because I like my happily ever afters wrapped up within that singular book. But since this one kind of carries on throughout another book, it's well done enough to where I want to see what happens. Now, what makes this book stand out from, say, the other books on the list is the fact that their story continues. So that's to say that they do end up getting together at the end of the first book, but there is some kind of like underlying conflict when it comes to distance, because he is I think he's like a wildlife photographer or something like that. And so it's almost as if they're having a long distance relationship because they need to adjust to his schedule and the fact that he's always globetrotting, going out and about and blah, blah, blah. And so it's interesting to see kind of like how they resolve that within their relationship. So if you like stories where the characters are trying to navigate their newfound relationship, then definitely check this book out. And I guess check the series out in general if you want to know how they end up. Next suggestion on my list is Beach Read. I read this book recently and could not stop talking about it. I even sent a copy to my friend. I'm pretty sure if you see the wrap up where I talked about it, I was just gushing about it so much. Now, I guess this one is a romance, but it can also teeter on women's fiction just because of how it's marketed. But to me, it's a romance with just some added extra elements within it. But if you're unfamiliar with the plot, Beach Read is basically about a woman who moves into a house that her recently deceased father left her. She is a writer struggling with writer's block, and so her neighbor, coincidentally, is also a writer, which she finds out was actually somebody that she went to college with, and the two of them agree to write, or at least try writing, within each other's genres, because he does kind of like darker fiction and she is a romance writer. And they're hoping that in addition to kind of showing each other how hard it is to write within their own respective genres, that will help break them out of each of their writing blocks. So I really love this story so much. For the sake of this video, I'm not going to go on gushing about it. It's fantastic, but the writing is just so multi-layered. I think that that's one of the reasons kind of why I feel it's more than just a romance, because obviously in addition to the romance, you've got all of these like darker personal struggles that each of the characters are dealing with, and it's written in such a way that you just feel for them so much. That's not to say that obviously regular romances within the genre can't be equally as deep, but there's just something about the Emily Henry's writing in this one that just, it's just next level. And so the dialogue between not only the characters, or not only between the main characters, but also like the side characters, is something that I absolutely adored. The main heroine and her friend, the like texts and stuff between them was something that I think just rang true as somebody who has a bestie who texts them all the time, and I really enjoyed seeing that aspect. Not to mention that there are some moments that are definitely tear-jerking, so much so to where I was like sobbing reading certain sections, which I totally was not expecting, but that just goes to show how much media it is than just I guess your typical romance where it's usually just more of a upbeat story with a happily ever after. So if you want your romance with a little bit more oomph, if you want to cry a little bit, then definitely check this one out. Okay, so continuing on that author main character premise, I want to talk about Swedish Sin next. Now, this is an older book that I read when it first came out more than a few years ago, but nonetheless it still holds up because I ended up giving it 5 stars. And this one is about a guy who moves in next door, or maybe it's vice versa, I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure the guy ends up moving next door to this charismatic woman who is a baker. She's trying to like salvage her struggling bakery, and he is a well-known I want to say YA author, and he's got like this best-selling series and whatnot, but he is also going through a writer's block. And so he meets his neighbor, and he's instantly drawn to her, even though she originally doesn't give him the time of the day. And when she figures out who he is, she wants to kind of help him get over his creative block. And yeah, it's just really the two of them forming a relationship. However, similarly to Beach Read, there are also some more heavier plot line in terms of him struggling with his past and trying to get over that. And so it's really sweet seeing the two of them kind of navigate their budding relationship, while also at the same time him trying to resolve this trauma that he's had in the past. I really enjoyed this book. I haven't read any of Inez Kelley's work recently, but again, this was a standout story for me when it first came out. I know that it got high praise, and if you're looking for a backlist book, or even just a book about neighbors where it's got more than just your fluff, then add this one to your TBR. So let's switch gears briefly, because this next book that I want to talk about is actually an audio exclusive. I want to say it's an Audible exclusive, but it could be on different platforms, but I listened to it on Audible and I gave it 5 stars because I loved it. That is Heidi's Guide to 4-Letter Words. I'm pretty sure I talked about this on some wrap-up a few months back, but this one is basically it's an audio exclusive because the woman involved starts a podcast. And so the way that the story is told, not only do we get her kind of like going out and about throughout her life, but also we hear these podcast episodes that she records. But the woman, Heidi, of course, is very introverted and doesn't really have a lot of life experience. However, when she loses her job as a teacher, she finds another job, not knowing that it is part of a publishing house where they narrate erotic books. And so she ends up talking to one of the guys there who's narrating the books, and the two of them hit it off. This isn't where the romance comes in, by the way, but they hit it off as friends, and he is determined to help her come out of her shell. And so to come out of her shell, she ends up starting her own podcast where she is chronicling coming out of her shell and her dating life. And dating, that basically is where her next door neighbor comes in, because she has had a crush on this guy for the longest time and tries to basically get his attention. And so we hear throughout these podcasts how each of their dates go, as well as see it again, because we get their narration with their interaction and everything. But I love this one so much as an audiobook. Again, I did give this one 5 stars as well, but I love to see stories where our main heroine or hero does a transformation. They kind of have like a Cinderella effect where they come into their own. And I really like this one because it was refreshing to see a woman, well, it was refreshing to see the main character willingly wanting to come out of their shell, because I know a lot of times what happens is that they're almost forced to do it or reluctant, but you know, they might have like their friends on the side telling them to do things and whatnot. But Heidi was totally in charge of everything. She was the one to make a move on her neighbors. She was the one to not necessarily be afraid to talk about sex and all of these other things that, you know, her small Minnesota town might otherwise blush at. And that was really refreshing to me, because all of the characters were open-minded, and to see her embrace who she was becoming was so much fun to see, and it brought me so much joy listening to it. And again, I highly recommend it on audio. I'm not sure even if they have it as a physical book version, but if you're able to grab the audio version, please listen to it. It's so much fun. Lots of laugh out loud moments, and yeah, I can't get enough of it. So add this one to your list for sure. Next on my list, we have Come Back to Bed. Now, this one is similar-ish to Wallbanger in the sense to where they are kind of like apartment neighbors sharing a wall. And the premise is similar also in that we have our main heroine kind of annoyed with the next door neighbor who is making a lot of noise, but not for the like wall banging aspect, if you will. But I really enjoyed this one because it was hilarious. I would definitely categorize it as a romantic comedy. Plenty of laugh out loud moments. There are a couple of lines that are like from Nora Ephron, which touched my heart because I'm a huge fan, and just little pieces here and there that really made this one a standout for me. But if the premise isn't already obvious, what we have are two next door neighbors who share a wall in an apartment complex, and they're total opposite. I think that is it the woman or the man? I'm getting confused, but one of them is like an uptight lawyer and the other one is completely opposite, and yet they still manage to hook up. And originally their hooking up is just to like scratch an itch, so to speak, but they end up forming a relationship. And if I'm remembering correctly, there is a part in there where like one of their other neighbors, who's like an older woman, is involved somehow. That's really hilarious, just in terms of like inviting them over to like this weird orgy party. I don't know, I could be misremembering, but if I'm remembering correctly, that scene was hilarious because they were kind of like ambushed into it, which was so funny to read. But definitely recommend this one as well, especially if you are a fan of romantic comedies, which personally I am. Once again, that's one of the reasons why I love these neighbor tropes, because I find that they lend themselves more to the humor, and I guess just expanding the world as well, because you can be at one person's apartment, you can go to the other person's apartment, and sometimes that actually plays a role into the story. And yeah, just so many more possibilities. So if this one sounds good to you as well, then add it to your list, add it to your TBR right now. Okay, genre change now. Let's talk about Linda Howard's Mr. Perfect. This is a romantic suspense that also is not new. I read this one a while back, but even to this day, I highly recommend it, especially for people who are wanting to kind of get into romantic suspense. And even if you are into romantic suspense and you haven't read Linda Howard, I mean, definitely add her to your list because she does fantastic work. But anyway, for this one, basically what we have is a group of girls, or excuse me, a group of women get together and they are making a list basically of who they would consider their perfect guy. So like all of his qualities and attributes and everything like that. Well, lo and behold, our main heroine ends up being stalked by some guy who is calling himself her Mr. Perfect. And so she's creeped out. I mean, who wouldn't be? And this is where her neighbor comes in, because she actually goes to him and asks for help because he is a police detective, I believe. And so the two of them are basically trying to figure out who this Mr. Perfect is, and he is at the same time trying to protect her because she's scared out of her mind about this stalker. And so this one was really interesting. It was very fast paced, but at the same time eerie as the suspense goes along, which is exactly what you want in a romantic suspense. And one of the reasons why I liked it is because, and I guess this is just Linda Howard's work in general, but there was the right balance of romance and suspense. Because I know sometimes, you know, if it's not written well, it can seem implausible that the characters would be wanting to hook up when there is this like life-threatening danger looming above them. The last thing you want to do, or maybe not, I don't know, but in this case, that's not what happens. There's a nice mix. Things happen when they're supposed to happen, and it's not as if like, hey, you should be running out of the door instead of kissing. There's none of that or anything. So like I said, if you are new to romantic suspense or wanting to dabble, or if you're a fan of it and somehow have never picked this one up, definitely pick it up, because it's just great all around. And it's so great that I feel like I should reread it for the fall season, because I do kind of get that eerie vibe. But I've got other fall stuff on my TBR, so I'm probably not going to do that. Last up, so this is another audio exclusive. However, it's not an audio book. It's actually part of a podcast, and the name of the podcast is called MeetCute. I just discovered them a little while ago, actually, maybe about a month, but it is a podcast where they do scripted 15-minute audio rom-coms. Basically, each of the episodes is a standalone romance, which features like a cast of characters. It's not like an audiobook where you've got a single narrator. It's an actual production where you've got like the male voice, the female voice, or you know, if it's same sex, it's two men that are completely different as opposed to the narrator reading both parts. And there's like sound effects and everything. But Anyway, the one that I read was called Moving Out, I believe. It's part of a moving series because they had like a moving in, moving out. Anyway, that's not the point. The one that I read was called Moving Out, which was so cute and actually really well done because if you have read or even just listened to books that are short form, you'll know how hard it is to tell a story within a short amount of time. And 15 minutes is definitely not a long time, but it was done so well and yet still believable. Basically, what we've got are two people who meet and they hit it off. However, the thing is, they've lived next to each other this whole time and they meet each other 2 days before the guy is about to move, which it's like, oh, bummer, right? Which is something that they acknowledge in the story. But one of the reasons why I absolutely adored this was because the career choices, and that's just to say that they really stand out. I've read a lot of romances and I know that there are a lot of romances out there to where the characters have like untraditional jobs, but it's always refreshing to see something other than like a librarian or a bakery owner. Again, not that there's anything wrong with that, but in this case, our heroine was a miniaturist hobbyist, meaning that they made miniature like diorama types things, which I thought was super interesting. And then I think the guy was a chemist, not that I'm downplaying that, but what really stood out was her job, which plays an integral part in the story because what happens is he is on the sidewalk having like a little flash sale trying to get rid of all of his stuff, and that's where he meets the heroine, and she ends up buying off of him, or maybe he gives it to her because it's free, a pencil sharpener in the shape of a toilet, and which is really quirky. And so it turns out that she needs that for her little diorama that she's making of like a bathroom. And so the two of them again hit it off. We find out about his past, how he got into doing what he does, and we found out more about her as well. And I'm just blown away by how much was compacted into this 15-minute skit because, again, I was perfectly able to imagine the characters. I know enough about his backstory to kind of know his motivation for things, and I'm not going to tell you how it ends, obviously, but it definitely ended on a note that I was not expecting, to where I'm just like, oh, that's so, oh, it's super cute. So I would definitely recommend this one for a neighbor story, but even beyond that, I would recommend this podcast in general because even if you're not a podcast listener, you know, I would equate it to the audio version of novellas. You know, sometimes you want something that is a quick bite, and even the shorter ones that I've come across are like an hour and a half, which sometimes is a little bit too long. This is perfect for like your commute. Well, I mean, maybe not if there's traffic, but like doing the dishes or doing chores or something around the house, to where you get the entire story within that short bite. So if that sounds like something that you would be interested in, definitely check out the MeetCute podcast. I will go ahead and also leave the link to their podcast below. Probably the Apple one because that's the service that I use, but I'm pretty sure it's available everywhere. But yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I plan on listening to not only the other episodes in their moving series, but also just other stories that they have available as well. Okay guys, so there you have it. That is my neighborly romance roundup. I have listened/read all of these books and have given them no less than 4 stars. I really enjoyed all of them. So hopefully my recommendation holds some kind of weight. But again, like I mentioned, I really love romance that feature neighbors because I find that it is an interesting premise that forces the characters to interact with one another without necessarily forcing them to be in the exact same room, as opposed to like roommates or something like that. But if you are a fan of neighbor romances, let me know if you have read any of these, and if so, which ones your favorites were. But again, if you have other suggestions that aren't on this list, feel free to include them as well so that I can add them to my own list. But I hope you guys enjoyed this roundup, and if you did, please like and subscribe to this channel, and I guess that'll about wrap it up. Happy reading, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye!